For decades, the global energy map followed a predictable pattern. Russia pumps an enormous amount of crude oil out of the ground and sells it to the rest of the world. On the other side of that deal is India, a massive, growing economy with an insatiable appetite for energy, importing millions of those barrels to power its development. The crude oil flows out of Russian ports and the money flows in. It has been a steady, one-way street, a predictable dynamic that has anchored global trade for generations. But on August 5th, a cargo ship arrived at a Russian port, carrying a payload that broke that pattern entirely. Its holds were filled with refined gasoline. The surprising part was where that gasoline originated. It was shipped directly from India. Despite sitting on some of the largest oil reserves on the planet, Moscow is currently facing a domestic gasoline shortage, struggling to keep its own vehicles fueled. How does a nation that dictates the global supply of crude oil end up importing basic petrol from a country that produces almost no oil of its own? Over the last year and a half, the conflict in Ukraine shifted, moving into a new phase of targeted, systematic strikes on Russian industrial infrastructure. Recurring drone strikes have hit and disabled key Russian oil refineries, creating a severe bottleneck in their internal supply chain. Extracting crude from the earth is only the first step. Turning that heavy sludge into usable fuels like petrol requires a highly complex scientific process of industrial refinement and chemical modification. Massive crude reserves are only useful if a nation has the machines to process them. With its refineries under pressure, Russia currently has the raw materials, but not the means to make them usable for its citizens. India, meanwhile, has spent years building a different kind of energy strength. They possess some of the most advanced and expansive refining facilities in the world. While not a major oil producer, India is the second largest exporter of refined petroleum on Earth, ahead of traditional leaders like Saudi Arabia. India controls 7% of the global market, recently exporting $56 billion worth of finished fuel. This capacity allows for a circular trade loop. India imports large quantities of raw, unrefined Russian crude at a significant discount. That cheap crude is sent directly through India's massive domestic refineries and turned into high-value petrol and diesel. India then sells that finished fuel back to a Russian market that can no longer meet its own demand. This positioning allows India to serve as a manufacturing middleman, turning its industrial capacity into a tool for trade leverage. However, India's reliance on Russian crude has created a serious economic challenge, a runaway trade deficit. India currently buys roughly $60 billion in goods from Russia, but only sells about $5 billion worth in return. When billions leave the country without being replaced by export revenue, it puts downward pressure on the Indian rupee, eroding its global value. China avoids this by offsetting their Russian oil purchases with exports of electronics and cars, which keeps their trade deficit much smaller and their currency more stable. For India, cheap energy becomes a less effective deal if the resulting trade gap weakens the national currency. This is why exporting refined petrol back to Russia is such a significant economic shift. It offers a direct way to narrow that trade gap. If India can increase these petroleum exports to $10 billion or more, it significantly reduces the capital flowing out of the country. A smaller deficit helps stabilize the rupee, as it reduces the constant selling pressure on the currency in international trade. Trading refined fuel back to a supplier changes the nature of the relationship. It moves from a simple purchase of raw materials to a state of mutual industrial dependency. The disruption to Russian refining has provided a practical opportunity for Indian exports. It creates a path to reduce the trade gap, maintain the stability of the rupee, and demonstrate the global reach of India's industrial sector.
If you value clarity over chaos, explore more on Clear Lens X.